Jake Moreno knew the sound of a dying engine before most people knew something was wrong. It coughed once outside his garage, then again, then it gave up completely. Jake stood under the half-broken sign that read, Moreno Auto Repair, holding a wrench in one hand and an overdue electric bill in the other. Rain tapped hard against the metal roof. Cold rain, Chicago rain, the kind that made every street look tired. He looked at the bill again. Final notice. He laughed once, but there was nothing funny in it. Yeah, he muttered. Get in line. Behind him, the garage lights flickered. One tube light buzzed above the workbench. Another had been dead for 2 weeks. Jake had promised himself he would replace it when money got better. Money never got better. His shop sat on a rough little corner on the south side, between a closed laundromat and a liquor store with bars on the windows. Years ago, people had come to Jake for everything. Brakes, engines, oil changes, transmission work. Now they drove past. New chains had opened 10 blocks away. Clean floors, free coffee, bright uniforms. Jake had grease under his fingernails and a coffee maker that smelled burned even when it was empty. He folded the electric bill and shoved it into his back pocket. Closing early, he called to no one. There was no one there. That was the thing about being alone. Sometimes a man still talked like someone might answer. Jake walked toward the front gate and pulled the chain loose from the post. His shoulders hurt. His knees hurt. Even his hands hurt. 46 was not old, but grief had a way of adding years. His wife, Marisol, used to stand by the office door with her arms crossed and say, "You work like the whole city will fall apart without you." And Jake would say, "It might." She would laugh. That laugh had been gone for 3 years. The shop had gone quiet after that. So had Jake. He dragged the gate halfway closed when the old sedan rolled into view. It came slow, too slow. A faded gray car from the late 90s, maybe early 2000s, with one headlight dimmer than the other and rainwater sliding down the windshield in uneven lines. The engine made a rough knocking sound. Jake froze. "No," he whispered. "Don't do it here." The sedan shuddered, rolled another few feet, then died right in front of his garage. Jake closed his eyes. Of course. The driver tried to start it again. The engine clicked again. Nothing. Jake stood there in the rain, staring at the car like it had personally insulted him. Then the driver's door opened. An old woman stepped out slowly, holding the door for balance. She looked to be in her 70s, maybe older, wrapped in a worn brown coat that had seen too many winters. A thin scarf covered her gray hair, and her shoes were polished but old. She looked at the garage, then at Jake. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't mean to stop here. It just quit." Jake wiped rain from his forehead. "Cars usually don't make appointments before they die." The old woman blinked. Then, to his surprise, she smiled a little. "No, I suppose they don't." Jake didn't smile back. He looked at the sky, then at the dead sedan, then toward the office where the lights flickered like they were begging to be turned off before the power company did it for him. "I'm close," he said. The woman nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. I understand. I'll call someone." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an old flip phone. Jake noticed her hands. They were shaking, not just from age, from cold. Maybe fear. She pressed a button, waited, pressed another. The phone did not turn on. She stared down at it, embarrassed. "Oh," she whispered, "the battery." Jake breathed out hard. He wanted to say no. He needed to say no. Every minute he kept the lights on cost him. Every small job that turned into a charity case pushed him closer to losing the shop. And he had already helped too many people who promised to come back and pay later. They never came back. People had a way of taking kindness and calling it luck. The old woman looked up at him. "I'm sorry," she said again. I can walk to a gas station. Is there one nearby? Jake almost laughed. At her age, in that rain in that neighborhood. He looked down the street. A car rushed past, splashing dirty water over the curb. The old woman flinched, but she didn't complain. Jake rubbed his jaw. Marisol would have already opened the garage door. That thought made him angry. Not at her, at himself. Get back in the car, he said. The woman hesitated. I don't want to trouble you. You already did. Her face fell slightly. Jake looked away. He hated that look. He turned and lifted the garage door with a loud metallic rattle. Put it in neutral, he said. I'll push. The woman climbed back in. Jake leaned his shoulder against the wet trunk and pushed. The sedan was heavier than it looked. His boots slid on the slick pavement, and pain shot through his lower back. Steer left. He called, I am more left. Oh, sorry. The car rolled into the garage, tires squeaking on the concrete floor. Jake dropped the hood latch and told her to stay inside where it was warmer. But she stepped out anyway, careful and quiet, as if she didn't want to take up too much of space. The garage smelled of oil, rubber, old coffee, and rain. The woman looked around, not nosy, just observant. Her eyes moved over the cracked floor, the unpaid invoices pinned near the desk, the framed photo of Jake and Marisol beside the register. She paused there. Jake noticed. Engine? He said, too sharply. Not a museum. The old woman turned back. I didn't mean to stare. People always don't mean to. Silence settled between them. Jake lifted the hood. Steam rose into his face. He coughed and waved it away. Great, he muttered. What is it? Could be a lot of things. He checked the belts first, then the battery, then the alternator. He moved fast, partly because he was good, partly because he wanted this over with. The woman stood near the workbench, hands folded in front of her. What's your name? She asked. Jake didn't look up. Jake, Jake, she repeated softly, like she was placing it somewhere in her memory. I'm Eleanor. Good for you. Another silence. Then she said, You remind me of someone. Jake let out a dry breath. Hope he had more money. Eleanor didn't answer right away. When Jake glanced up, her face had changed. Only for a second. Something passed through her eyes. Pain. Maybe old pain. Then it was gone. No, she said quietly. He didn't care much about money either. Jake returned to the engine. He told himself not to care. He was just checking the car. That was all. Find the problem, quote the price, watch her face fall, and then decide whether to lock up and call a tow truck. Simple, but the deeper he looked, the less simple it felt. The sedan had problems. Sure, old hoses, weak battery, bad connections. But then Jake saw something near the brake line. A small clamp, too clean, too new. Wrong angle. He frowned. Rain hammered the roof harder. The garage light flickered again. Jake leaned closer. What the hell? Eleanor's voice came from behind him. Is something wrong? Jake didn't answer. His fingers touched the clamp lightly. It had not failed from age. Someone had put it there. Carefully. Quietly. The kind of thing most mechanics might miss if they were tired, rushed, or just doing the minimum. Jake stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked at the old woman standing in his dying garage, wrapped in that worn brown coat, watching him with calm eyes that suddenly did not seem weak at all. And for the first time that evening, Jake felt the cold move through him. Not from the rain, from something else. Jake didn't say anything at first. He just kept staring at the brake line. The small metal clamp sat there like it belonged, like it had every right to be there. But it didn't. A mechanic who knew what he was looking at could tell immediately. And Jake knew. The clamp had been tightened just enough to slowly damage the hydraulic pressure over time. Not enough to fail immediately, not enough to look obvious, just enough for the brakes to eventually stop responding at high speed. An accident waiting for the right moment. Jake straightened slowly. Rain pounded the garage roof above them. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled across the south side. Eleanor stood quietly near the workbench, watching him, not nervous, not confused, just waiting. Jake wiped grease from his fingers onto an old rag. Who worked on this car less? And Eleanor blinked once. I'm sorry, the brakes. He pointed under the hood. Who touched them? I don't know. I usually have someone from the company arrange maintenance. Company. The word slipped out before he could stop it. Eleanor seemed to realize it too. A tiny pause. Then she smiled politely. Old habit. I used to run a small business years ago. Jake grunted. Must have been pretty successful. Her eyes shifted toward the watch on her wrist for half a second. Gold. Old gold. Not flashy. Worse. Expensive people rarely wore flashy things. They wore quiet things that cost more than cars. Jake had seen watches like that once in a magazine sitting in a dentist office years ago. Swiss, limited edition, rich people nonsense. He remembered Marisol laughing at him while he flipped through it. You don't even wear watches. Yeah, but if I was rich, I'd wear this one. And then I'd still be late everywhere. She laughed so hard she snorted. Jake swallowed hard at the memory and looked away from Eleanor. Your small business must have done real good. Eleanor's smile faded slightly. It did. Jake crouched beside the wheel again. The rain got louder. Or maybe the silence inside the garage did. After another minute, Eleanor spoke softly. Is it dangerous? Jake didn't answer immediately. He checked the line again to be sure. Then again, his stomach tightened. Yes, he finally said. Eleanor stayed very still. How dangerous Jake stood. If that clamp slipped while you were driving fast, he hesitated. You probably wouldn't stop in time. The garage went quiet except for the rain. Eleanor looked down at the concrete floor. Not shocked, not panicked, just tired, like someone who had expected bad news for a very long time. Jake noticed that, and suddenly he didn't like it. You saying somebody tried to hurt you? He asked. Eleanor looked up slowly. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She folded her hands tighter together. Jake watched her carefully now. Everything about her suddenly felt different. The coat, the posture, even the way she spoke. Not weak, controlled, like someone who spent years learning how to stay calm while bad things happened around them. Jake had met people like that before. Mostly rich clients back when his shop still did work for downtown companies. People who hid fear behind manners. He tossed the rag onto the workbench. You got family. Eleanor hesitated. Not anymore. Something in her voice made Jake stop asking questions. He knew that sound too. The sound of someone carrying a grave around inside them. Jake turned back toward the engine. The battery terminals were corroded. Alternator weak. Brake line compromised. A couple hoses needed replacing too. The car was a mess. But strangely, it had been maintained well. Too well for a random old woman struggling alone. The oil was fresh. Tires rotated recently. High-end synthetic fluid. Nothing cheap. Jake frowned again. You drive this every day, sometimes. Sometimes, he repeated. And where exactly do you go? Eleanor smiled faintly. You ask many questions for someone who seemed eager to close. Jake snorted. Occupational hazard. The woman stepped closer to the old coffee machine near the office wall. Does this still work? Barely. May I? Jake shrugged. If you survive it, let me know how. She actually laughed softly at that. A real laugh this time. Small, warm. It caught Jake off guard. She poured coffee into a chipped paper cup and took a careful sip, then immediately winced. Oh dear. Jake smirked despite himself. Told you. It tastes like burnt pennies. That's the premium blend. For the first time all evening, the garage didn't feel completely dead. Eleanor leaned lightly against the counter. You live here, she asked gently. Jake stiffened. What makes you think that? She nodded toward the back hallway, where an old lamp glowed dimly beside a folded blanket. Jake followed her eyes and cursed under his breath. Temporary. She didn't challenge the lie, but she didn't believe it either. Outside, the police sirens screamed somewhere in the distance. Jake went back to work. Minutes passed. The clock above the office door ticked loudly. Eleanor wandered slowly through the garage, studying old frame photos hanging crooked on the wall. Cars Jake had restored years ago. Local racing trophies. One picture of him and Marisol standing beside the garage when it first opened. Back when Jake still smiled easily. Eleanor stopped in front of that photo. She was beautiful. Jake's hand froze on the wrench. For a moment he considered pretending not to know who she meant. Instead he said quietly, Yeah, your wife, she died. Eleanor looked back at the photo. What was her name? Marisol. That's a lovely name. Jake tightened a bolt harder than necessary. Cancer. That word still lived inside him like broken glass. Marisol got sick fast. Treatment got expensive faster. Insurance fought them over everything. Jake sold tool, then savings, then pieces of himself, and in the end, none of it mattered. The hospital room still went silent one cold morning in February. After that, Jake stopped fixing things outside the garage. He couldn't even fix the one person who mattered. You loved her very much, Eleanor said softly. Jake laughed once, short, bitter. Guess I wasn't subtle. No, Eleanor whispered. You were loyal. Jake didn't answer. Nobody used words like that anymore. Not around him. Not about him. People mostly called him difficult now, or angry, or washed up. Eleanor set the empty coffee cup down carefully. I know what it is to lose someone, she said. Jake glanced at her. There it was again. That look. Deep pain hidden under control. What happened? For the first time all evening, Eleanor seemed unsure. She looked toward the rain-covered windows. My son died 10 years ago. Jake waited. She swallowed slowly. They called it an accident. Something tightened in Jake's chest. Called it an accident. Not was an accident. Called it one. Jake looked back toward the brake line. Then toward her, and suddenly the whole garage felt different again. Smaller somehow. Like the walls were slowly closing in. You think somebody killed him? Eleanor didn't answer directly. Instead, she walked toward the sedan and rested one hand lightly on the roof. When people have enough money, she said quietly, they imagine it protects them from cruelty. She looked at him then. It doesn't. Jake held her gaze for a long moment. Then the lights flickered again. Harder this time. The garage hummed. And suddenly darkness. Everything shut off at once. The buzzing lights died. The office lamp vanished. Even the coffee machine clicked silent. Rain hammered the roof in the dark. Jake closed his eyes. Perfect. Outside, the entire block had gone dim. Power outage. Or maybe the electric company finally decided they were done waiting. Jake grabbed a flashlight from the workbench drawer and smacked it against his palm until it turned on. The weak beam cut through the dark garage. Eleanor stood quietly beside the car, half her face hidden in shadow. You should go home, Jake muttered. And how exactly would I do that? Jake rubbed his forehead. Right. The car. He sighed heavily, then pointed the flashlight back toward the engine. I can still finish enough to get it running. You don't have to. Yeah, Jake said tiredly. Apparently I do. Eleanor watched him for a moment. Then she said something so quietly he almost missed it. "You remind me of my son." Jake froze. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in his hand. He didn't know why those words bothered him. Maybe because nobody had looked at him with warmth in a very long time. Maybe because part of him still wanted to be the kind of man Marisol believed he was. Or maybe because somewhere deep down, Jake already knew this woman's broken car was not the real problem anymore. The rain finally slowed sometime after midnight. Not completely, just enough for the city to breathe again. Jake lay half under the sedan with a flashlight between his teeth, tightening the last connection near the brake assembly while Eleanor sat quietly near the office doorway. Neither of them spoke much anymore. The silence had changed. It no longer felt awkward, just careful. Jake slid himself out from beneath the car with a groan and wiped sweat from his forehead. His shirt clung to his back despite the cold. "Try it now," he called. Eleanor moved into the driver's seat. The engine turned once, twice, then finally came alive with a rough but steady growl. Jake listened carefully. No knocking, no hesitation. Good enough. Eleanor looked through the windshield at him. "You fixed it." "Temporarily," Jake corrected. "Your alternator's still dying, and the hoses need replacing soon. But it will drive." "Yeah." She shut the engine off and stepped out slowly. The garage felt strangely warm now, even without power. Jake avoided looking directly at her. "Like I said," he muttered, "temporary." Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an old leather wallet. Jake immediately shook his head. "No. At least let me pay for the parts." "No. You spent hours working." Jake grabbed his toolbox and snapped it shut harder than necessary. "I said no." Eleanor stared at him quietly. Most people argued when he refused money. Rich people especially. They either got offended or suspicious, but Eleanor only looked at him for a long moment and asked softly why Jake opened his mouth, then stopped. Because honestly, he didn't fully know. Maybe because she reminded him of the hospital volunteers who used to bring Marisol blankets during chemo. Maybe because she looked lonely in a way he recognized too well. Or maybe because when he saw her holding that old wallet with trembling fingers, he suddenly remembered the exact moment Marisol once whispered from a hospital bed, "Don't let this world make you hard." Jake, too late for that, he had thought back then. But maybe not completely. Jake looked away. "You got enough problems already." Eleanor's eyes softened slightly. "You don't even know me." Jake snorted. "I know tired when I see it." For a second, Eleanor looked genuinely shaken by that, like the sentence hit somewhere deeper than he intended. She slowly closed the wallet. Then she asked, "What do I owe you?" Jake grabbed a rag and cleaned his hands. "Nothing." "That doesn't feel fair." "Life's not fair." Another small silence settled between them. Rain dripped steadily outside the garage door. Somewhere far down the street, tires hissed against wet pavement. Eleanor stepped closer. "You could have charged me." "Yeah, you probably should have." "Probably, but you didn't." Jake shrugged. "Just drive careful." The words came out rougher than he meant them to. But Eleanor reacted like he had handed her something fragile, something valuable. Her lips parted slightly, and suddenly she looked older. Not physically. Emotionally, like a woman carrying years nobody else could see. "No one says things like that anymore," she whispered. Jake frowned. "What, drive careful?" He didn't know what to say to that, so instead he reached for the garage door chain. Conversation over. But before Eleanor got into the sedan, she paused. "Jake." He looked back. "What? What's the name of your shop?" He glanced automatically toward the faded sign outside. Moreno Auto. Eleanor nodded slowly, as if memorizing it. Then she asked one final question. "What time do you open tomorrow?" Jake narrowed his eyes. "Why, just curious." "8." She smiled faintly. You should sleep more. Jake almost laughed. Lady, you should see the rest of my bad decisions. That earned another soft laugh from her. Then she climbed into the sedan. The headlights flickered weakly as the engine started. Jake watched the car disappear slowly into the wet Chicago streets until the red taillights vanished around the corner. Then everything became quiet again. Too quiet. Jake locked the garage, walked through the dark office, and collapsed into the old chair beside his desk. His body ached, but his mind would not stop moving. That brake clamp bothered him. No, not just bothered. It felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. Deliberate, cold. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. 3 years ago, Jake would have ignored it. Not his business. Fix the car, take the money, move on. That was safer. But now he kept hearing Eleanor's voice. They called it an accident. Jake rubbed both hands over his face. Don't get involved, he muttered to himself. The shop was already drowning. One missed payment away from losing everything. He did not need trouble from rich people and their secrets, especially not if someone was actually trying to kill that woman. He stood up, grabbed an old beer from the tiny refrigerator, then stopped halfway. Marisol used to hate when he drank angry. You don't even enjoy it, she would tell him. You just punish yourself slower. Jake stared at the beer for a long moment, then quietly put it back. The office felt colder after that. He eventually fell asleep on the old couch behind the desk around 2 in the morning, still wearing grease-stained jeans. And he dreamed about brake lines, about cars that wouldn't stop, about headlights coming straight toward him in the dark. The next morning, Jake woke to pounding on the garage door. Not knocking, pounding. He jerked upright immediately, disoriented. Sunlight leaked weakly through the dirty office window. His neck screamed in pain. The pounding came again. Jake. He recognized the voice instantly. Luis. Jake opened the garage door halfway and squinted into the morning light. Luis Ramirez stood outside holding coffee and looking nervous. Luis owned the small tire shop 2 blocks away. Mid-30s. Fast talker. Too friendly for his own good. You look terrible, Luis said. Good morning to you too. Luis handed him coffee. Jake took it suspiciously. You poison this, not today. Jake drank anyway. Luis kept glancing down the street. That immediately put Jake on edge. What you got, visitors? Jake frowned. What visitors? Luis pointed toward the far corner. Jake stepped outside and froze. 3 black SUVs sat parked across the street. Clean, dark windows. Expensive, not neighborhood cars. Men in suits stood beside them, scanning the block calmly. Not cops, not gang members either. Worse. Professional? Jake's stomach tightened. What the hell is this? Luis lowered his voice dramatically. Mrs. Delgado thinks it's the FBI. Mrs. Delgado thinks pigeons work for the government. Okay, fair point. Jake kept staring at the SUVs. One of the suited men looked directly at him, then touched his earpiece. Jake immediately hated that. You expecting somebody? Luis asked. No. You owe money to dangerous people, only boring people. Luis laughed nervously. Jake didn't. The garage suddenly felt very small again. His eyes moved across the street. Every neighbor nearby was watching through windows now. The liquor store owner stood outside pretending to sweep. An old man walking his dog had stopped completely. Even kids on bicycles slowed down to stare. Southside neighborhoods noticed black SUVs. Always. One of the suited men finally crossed the street. Tall guy, mid-40s, clean shave, gray suit. The kind of face trained not to reveal anything. Jake stood his ground. The man stopped a few feet away. Mister, Moreno. Jake crossed his arms. Depends who's asking. The man pulled out a small card, no company logo, no name Jake recognized. My employer would like to speak with you. Jake didn't touch the card. About what, the woman you assisted 3 nights ago? Jake felt something cold move through his chest. Eleanor! Louis looked between them like he was watching a crime movie in real life. Jake kept his voice flat. She okay? The suited man held his gaze for a moment, then said quietly, She's alive because of you. Jake said nothing. The man stepped aside toward the SUVs, and the rear passenger door slowly opened. Jake's entire neighborhood seemed to stop breathing at once. A woman stepped out wearing a dark-tailored coat and black gloves, elegant, controlled, powerful. Nothing like the tired old woman standing in his garage during the storm, but Jake recognized her immediately. Eleanor looked directly at him. Then the entire block went silent as Louise whispered beside him. Jake, his voice cracked. I think that lady's rich. Jake stared across the street. For a second, his brain genuinely refused to connect the two versions of Eleanor together. The woman from the storm, the woman stepping out of a black SUV, they looked like two completely different people. 3 days ago, she had stood in his garage wearing a worn brown coat, holding a dead flip phone with shaking hands. Now everything about her carried weight. Not loud wealth, not flashy wealth. Something colder. The kind of power that made people lower their voices without realizing it. Louis leaned closer. Should I call somebody? Jake frowned. Who I don't know. Batman? Jake ignored him. Eleanor crossed the street slowly while the suited men stayed near the SUVs. People along the block openly stared now. Mrs. Delgado had fully abandoned pretending to water her plants. Even the liquor store owner stopped sweeping. Eleanor reached Jake and gave him the same small smile she wore in the garage. Only now Jake noticed something else. Exhaustion. Deep exhaustion. Not physical. The kind money could not fix. Good morning, Jake. He folded his arms tighter. You lied to me. Louise quietly took 2 steps backward. Smart man? Eleanor nodded once. Yes. Jake waited for an explanation. She didn't offer one immediately. Instead, she looked up at the faded garage sign, Moreno Auto. Her voice softened slightly. It looked bigger in the rain. Jake almost smiled despite himself. Almost. What is this? He asked. Who are these people? My security team. You need a whole army to drive around Chicago. Normally. Yes. Normally, Eleanor glanced briefly toward the SUV windows. Not 3 nights ago. Jake caught that immediately. You left them behind on purpose. Another pause. Then Eleanor said quietly, I needed to know something. Jake's jaw tightened. You used me to test people. No, but you hid who you were. Yes. Luis looked deeply uncomfortable now. Jake, he whispered, I think I should go. Probably. Luis pointed toward the SUVs. If they kill you, I'm taking your toolbox. Fair. Luis hurried off down the sidewalk. Coward. Jake looked back at Eleanor. You better start talking. One of the suited men moved slightly closer. Eleanor raised one hand without looking back. The man stopped immediately. Jake noticed that too. Nobody questioned her. Nobody hesitated. That kind of obedience came from years of fear or respect. Maybe both. Eleanor looked toward the garage. May we speak inside? Jake almost said no. Every instinct told him this situation was dangerous. People with money brought problems. Big problems. And whatever was happening here already smelled bad. But then he remembered the brake clamp, the hospital tone in Eleanor's voice when she spoke about her son, and the simple truth that she had come back. Most rich people would have sent lawyers, or assistants, or checks, not themselves. Jake stepped aside. 5 minutes. Eleanor nodded and entered the garage. The suited men stayed outside. Jake immediately noticed how strange the garage looked with someone like her standing inside it now. The cracked floor, the flickering lights, the old radio hanging by wires. The place suddenly looked even poorer than usual. Eleanor slowly removed her gloves. Her hands trembled slightly again. Interesting. Not weakness. Stress. Jake shut the garage door halfway for privacy. The outside noise dulled instantly. "What's your real name?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Eleanor Vance." Jake blinked once, then twice. The name hit harder than expected. Even he knew it. Everybody did. Eleanor Vance, founder of Vance Dynamics. Auto parts, manufacturing, shipping. Half the country probably had something made by her company inside their cars. Jake remembered magazine covers years ago, business interviews, news stories. Then suddenly, nothing. She disappeared from public life after her son died. Rumors everywhere afterward. Corporate fights, family scandals, stories about board members turning against each other. Jake looked at the woman standing in his garage. "You're supposed to be dead or hiding on a private island somewhere." A faint smile crossed her face. "I considered both." Jake let out a breath and leaned against the workbench. "So what exactly do you want from me?" Eleanor became serious again. "When you repaired my car, you found something? The brake line?" "Yes." Jake nodded slowly. "You already knew about it." "No," she said quietly, "but I suspected." Jake stared at her. "Jesus." Eleanor walked slowly toward the sedan parked inside the garage. "I've had 3 accidents in 18 months. Jake's expression hardened. 3. The first was blamed on weather, the second on mechanical failure, and the third she looked directly at him. "You." Jake frowned. "But you prevented it." The garage suddenly felt colder. Jake crossed his arms again. "Why would somebody want you dead?" Eleanor laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because she was tired. "Jake, do you know how much my company's worth?" "No, neither do I anymore." That answer unsettled him more than numbers would have. Eleanor rested one hand on the hood of the sedan. "My son Daniel was supposed to inherit everything." Her voice almost broke on his name. "Almost." Jake stayed quiet. "He died in a car accident 10 years ago." "You said that?" "Yes." She swallowed slowly. "For a long time I believed it." Jake felt the room tighten around them. Then Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and removed a small photograph. Old, folded at the edges. She handed it to him. Jake looked down. A young man stood beside Eleanor in front of a black luxury car. Maybe early 30s. Dark hair. Confident smile. But Jake barely noticed the man at first, because he noticed the car, specifically the garage logo sticker in the corner of the windshield. Moreno Auto. Jake looked up sharply. "That's my shop." Eleanor nodded. "Daniel trusted you." Jake stared at the picture again, then suddenly remembered. A customer from years ago. Before Marisol got sick, a younger businessman who brought in classic cars sometimes because he hated dealerships. Quiet guy. Always tipped too much. Loved restoring old engines himself. Jake had completely forgotten. "Wait," Jake muttered. "That was your son," Eleanor nodded again. Jake sat down slowly in the old office chair. Memory hit him in pieces now. Daniel Vance sitting exactly there drinking terrible coffee, talking about cars like they mattered more than money, laughing when Jake cursed at strip bolts. Jake rubbed his forehead hard. "He died like a month after I last saw him." "Yes." Jake looked back at the photo. Something ugly started forming in his stomach. "You think his brakes were tampered with too?" Eleanor said nothing. That silence answered enough. Jake leaned back heavily. "No," he whispered. "He died driving alone at night." Jake's chest tightened. "They said he lost control." Jake remembered the news report now. Rain, bridge railing, car fire, no survivors. At the time, Jake never questioned it. But now, he suddenly remembered Daniel mentioning strange issues with the vehicle weeks earlier. Small things, electrical failures, brake response problems. Jake had checked everything and found nothing obvious, because whoever did it had been careful, very careful. Jake looked up slowly. You think somebody's been trying to kill your family for years? Eleanor's eyes filled with something darker than fear. Certainty. I think somebody already succeeded once. The garage became silent again. Outside, faint voices from neighbors drifted through the walls. Life continuing, cars passing, people laughing somewhere far down the block. Normal sounds. Meanwhile, inside the garage, Jake felt like he had accidentally stepped into something enormous and rotten. He stood abruptly. No. Eleanor blinked. No, I'm not doing this. Jake pointed toward the door. You need police, lawyers, federal agents, whatever rich people buy when things go bad. I've tried, and Eleanor gave a tired smile. And now my lawyers work for people I no longer trust. Jake felt a chill move through him. That's paranoid, is it? She stepped closer. 3 members of my company board became significantly wealthier after Daniel died. Jake said nothing. 1 died suddenly last year. That still leaves 2. Yes. Rainwater dripped steadily from the garage roof outside. Jake's thoughts raced. This was insane. A corporate murder, tampered brakes, billionaires hiding in broken sedans. This was not his life. His life was unpaid bills and failing engines. Simple misery, manageable misery. Eleanor looked at him carefully. I'm not asking you to save me. Good. I'm asking you to tell me the truth. Jake frowned. What truth? She held his gaze steadily. When you looked at my car, her voice lowered. What exactly did you see? Jake didn't answer immediately. He walked back toward the sedan instead. Partly to think, partly because looking at engines was easier than looking at people, especially people carrying grief like Eleanor. The garage smelled of oil and cold metal. Outside, the neighborhood noise had returned little by little, but the black SUVs still sat across the street like a warning nobody could ignore. Jake opened the hood again. The damaged brake assembly sat exactly where he left it. He pointed at the clamp. Eleanor stepped closer. Explain it to me. Jake grabbed a flashlight and angled it carefully. See the wear pattern here, he asked. She leaned in slightly. Most wealthy people Jake had met pretended to understand technical things. Eleanor actually listened. That clamp was tightened unevenly. He continued. Not enough to fail right away. Just enough to stress the line over time. Eleanor stayed quiet. Jake tapped the metal lightly. At high speed. Hard braking. He shook his head. Pressure eventually fails. And that causes you hit the brakes. Jake looked directly at her, and nothing happens. The words settled heavily between them. Eleanor slowly exhaled. Could it have been accidental? Jake didn't sugarcoat it. No. She nodded once, almost like confirmation. Not surprise. That bothered Jake more than panic would have. How long have you suspected this? He asked. Eleanor looked away toward the office wall where the old photo of Jake and Marisol still hung crooked. Since my son died, Jake frowned. 10 years I had suspicions. Small things. Conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Financial decisions Daniel disagreed with before he died. She folded her gloves carefully in her hands. After his accident, people moved very quickly. How quickly, faster than grief should allow. Jake knew exactly what she meant. When Marisol died, time stopped. At least for him. Bills piled up, food spoiled, days blurred together. But the world outside kept moving anyway. Fast, cruelly fast. People forgot. That was the worst part. Not death itself. The speed of everyone else recovering from it. Eleanor's voice pulled him back. Daniel wanted to change the company. Jake leaned against the workbench. How? He wanted transparency, safer manufacturing standards. He planned to expose several internal contracts connected to politicians and overseas suppliers. Jake raised an eyebrow. Sounds expensive? It was, and people didn't like that. No. Silence settled again. Jake rubbed his jaw slowly. You got proof, Eleanor gave a faint smile. If I had proof, Jake, I wouldn't be hiding in old sedans. Fair point. Jake walked toward the coffee machine and poured himself a cup automatically before realizing it was empty. He cursed softly. Eleanor watched him. You don't trust easily. Jake snorted. Should I? No, she admitted quietly. That honesty caught him off guard again. Most powerful people tried to sound reassuring. Eleanor sounded tired of pretending. Jake finally sat down across from her in the tiny office corner. The chair creaked under him. You know what the smart move is here. Yep, now walk away. Yes, you hire real investigators. I already did. And two quit. Jake stared at her. One disappeared. That landed hard. Jake leaned back slowly. Jesus Christ. Eleanor lowered her eyes briefly. I'm not asking you because you're special. That irritated him more than it should have. Oh, good. I'm asking because you noticed something nobody else did. Jake opened his mouth, closed it again, because damn it, she was right. Luxury dealerships, private security drivers, corporate mechanics, all of them missed it or ignored it, and somehow the broke mechanic from the South Side spotted it in minutes. Jake hated that part of himself immediately. The part that cared. The part already mentally replaying Daniel's old visits to the shop, trying to remember detail, trying to fit pieces together. Eleanor reached into her purse slowly. Jake tensed automatically. She noticed. You really don't trust anyone. Occupational hazard. A tiny smile touched her lips again. Then she pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. Old, yellowed. She slid it across the desk. Jake unfolded it carefully. The headline read, Vance hair dies in tragic late-night crash. Below it was a photo of Daniel smiling beside a black sedan crushed against a highway barrier. Jake's stomach tightened. He scanned the article quickly. Weather conditions. Brake failure suspected. No foul play indicated. Standard investigation complete. Jake frowned harder. Then something near the bottom caught his eye. A quote from the responding mechanic team. He recognized the company name immediately. Brenner Automotive Consulting. Jake sat upright. What Eleanor watched him carefully. Do you know them? Jake let out a bitter laugh. Know them, they bought half the independent garages out west, and they also contract with Vance Dynamics. Eleanor nodded slowly. Exactly. Jake read the article again. Then a sick realization crept over him. The same company that inspected your son's crash. Yes. Also handled maintenance on your current car. Yes. Jake leaned back hard. That's not coincidence. No. The office suddenly felt too small. Jake stood up again and paced once across the garage. He hated pacing. Marisol used to say he paced when fear disguised itself as anger. And right now he was angry as hell. Because this whole thing was starting to feel real. Too real. Eleanor watched him carefully. You can still walk away. Jake laughed sharply. Can I? Yes. You sure about that? Her silence answered enough. That frightened him more than anything yet. Because if people powerful enough to manipulate investigations wanted Eleanor dead, then Jake already knew too much. He stopped pacing. You should have gone to the police. I did. And one detective reopened Daniel's file 6 years ago. Jake waited. Eleanor's eyes darkened. He died of a heart attack 3 weeks later. Jake stared at her. No, he was 42. The garage went quiet again. Jake suddenly became aware of every sound around them. The hum of old lights, distant traffic, a train horn far across the city, and outside. One of the SUV doors opened briefly. Jake glanced toward the window automatically. Two suited men were speaking quietly beside the vehicles, watching the street, watching everything. Eleanor noticed his expression. You understand now. Jake rubbed both hands over his face. No, he muttered. I understand I should have stayed in bed this morning. That finally made Eleanor laugh softly again. Real laughter this time. Tired, but real. And for one strange second, Jake saw a glimpse of who she used to be before grief hollowed her out. A mother, not a billionaire. Just a mother. He sat back down slowly. You know the crazy part. What? Jake looked toward the old photograph of Marisol hanging on the wall. If my wife were here. His voice caught slightly. Eleanor stayed silent. Jake swallowed. She'd tell me to help you. Eleanor's eyes softened immediately. She sounds wise. She was annoying. That earned another tiny laugh. Jake looked down at the newspaper clipping again, at Daniel's smiling face. Then at the words "brake failure suspected." He suddenly remembered something else. A conversation years ago. Daniel sitting in this exact garage late one evening while Jake replaced a fuel pump. You ever feel like rich people live inside cages? Daniel had asked. Jake remembered laughing. You got the money? Buy bigger cages. Daniel smiled at that back then. But now Jake remembered something else too. The look in his eyes afterward. Not amused. Trapped. Jake slowly folded the clipping. When's the last time you drove without security? Eleanor thought for a moment. 3 nights ago. Before that, a long time. Jake nodded slowly. Then whoever tampered with the car probably assumed your normal security team wouldn't notice. They didn't. But you leaving alone. Jake looked up. That changed the timing. Eleanor understood immediately. And the car failed before I reached the highway. Yeah. Jake's chest tightened again. If her engine had not died outside his garage, if she had made it another 20 minutes, another 30, he didn't finish the thought. Neither did she. The silence said enough. Then suddenly a loud knock hit the garage door. Hard. Jake stood instantly. Every muscle tightened. Outside, one of the suited men called through the metal door. Ma'am. Eleanor turned calmly. What is it? A pause. Then the voice came again. There's a vehicle approaching the block repeatedly. Jake frowned. What does that mean? The suited man answered immediately. Same black sedan has passed 4 times in 12 minutes. The garage atmosphere changed instantly. Not dramatic. Worse. Professional. Eleanor slowly stood. Jake felt his heartbeat pick up. Outside, another SUV engine started, and for the first time since this began, Jake realized something terrifying. This wasn't paranoia anymore. Someone was watching. Nobody moved for a second. Then everything started happening at once. Outside, car doors opened. One of the suited men spoke rapidly into an earpiece. Another walked toward the corner of the block with one hand inside his coat. Jake looked at Eleanor. She stayed calm. Too calm. That frightened him more than panic would have. What kind of people are after you? He asked quietly. Eleanor answered without hesitation. The kind who smile in public. The suited man knocked again. Ma'am, we should leave. Jake moved toward the side window and carefully peeked through the blinds. Halfway down the street, a black sedan rolled slowly past the garage again. Dark windows. Ordinary looking, which somehow made it worse. The driver never turned his head, never slowed, just kept moving. Jake's stomach tightened anyway. 1 pass could mean nothing. 4 passes didn't. You know them? He asked. Eleanor joined him near the window, but kept her distance from the glass. No, that's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be. The sedan disappeared around the corner. Jake rubbed his jaw hard. Every instinct screamed at him to shut this down immediately. Send her away or forget everything. Go back to fixing transmissions and worrying about rent. Simple problems. Safe problems. But deep down, he already knew the truth. Nothing about this was simple anymore. Not after the brake line. Not after Daniel. And definitely not after black sedans started circling his block. The suited man entered the garage carefully. Ma'am, Eleanor turned. What did Marcus say? He wants to relocate you immediately. Jake noticed something interesting. The man never questioned her, never interrupted. But underneath the professionalism, he looked worried, genuinely worried. That meant the threat was real enough to scare trained people. Eleanor glanced toward Jake. I'll leave if you want me to. Jake almost laughed. If I want you to, you didn't ask for this. No kidding. She stepped closer slowly. Then tell me to go. Jake opened his mouth, and nothing came out. Because the second she left, what then would whoever tampered with her car simply stop? Would people magically forget Jake existed? No chance. He already knew too much. The suited man's phone buzzed sharply. He answered instantly. Yes. Silence. Then his expression changed. Are you sure? Jake felt cold move through him again. The man listened another few seconds, then lowered the phone slowly. What Eleanor asked, the man hesitated. Marcus checked traffic cameras nearby. And that sedan has no plates. The garage became dead silent. Jake cursed softly under his breath. Eleanor looked toward the window again, still calm, but now Jake noticed something underneath it. Fear, not for herself, for him, and somehow that hit harder. You should leave, she said quietly. Jake stared at her. What, they know you helped me? Great. I'm serious. So am I. Eleanor took another step closer. This situation destroys people. Jake, that sentence carried weight. Personal weight. Jake suddenly realized she wasn't warning him theoretically. She had watched this happen before, probably many times. The suited man spoke carefully. We have a secure location ready. Jake immediately shook his head. No. Both of them looked at him. Jake pointed toward the street. If somebody's watching this place, moving her right now could make things worse. The suited man frowned slightly. And staying here is better. For the next few minutes, Jake shrugged. Maybe. The man clearly didn't enjoy taking advice from a mechanic. Too bad. Jake walked back toward the sedan and stared again at the brake assembly. His brain was moving now. Fast. Something bothered him. Something beyond the sabotage itself. Then suddenly he froze. Eleanor noticed immediately. What is it? Jake crouched lower beside the wheel. No. He grabbed the flashlight and aimed deeper under the chassis. His pulse quickened, because now he saw a second modification. Smaller, hidden better, a tiny transmitter, magnetic, tucked behind the frame. Jake looked up slowly. They tracked the car. The suited man moved instantly, where Jake pointed. The man crouched beside him, expression hardening immediately. Damn it. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, like this confirmed her worst fears. Jake pulled the device free carefully. Small black casing, no markings, professional equipment, not cheap. The suited man took it from him. Can you disable it? Jake stared at him. I fix engines. The man immediately handed it to another guard outside. Jake stood slowly. His heart was pounding now, because suddenly this became much bigger than suspicion. Someone had sabotaged Eleanor's car, tracked her movements, and likely followed her directly to his garage. The suited man spoke into his earpiece again. New protocol. Full sweep. Jake looked toward Eleanor. You knew it was this bad, she answered honestly. No. That honesty again. No performance. No fake control. Just truth. Jake sat heavily on the workbench. His mind raced through ugly possibilities. If the tracker led people here, then whoever planted it might already know exactly who he was, where he lived, what he drove, how vulnerable he was. The garage suddenly felt exposed from every angle. Eleanor watched him quietly. You regret helping me? Jake thought about it. Really thought about it. Then surprisingly, no. That answer shocked both of them. Jake shook his head slightly. Guess I'm stupider than I thought. A faint sadness crossed Eleanor's face. No, she whispered. Just decent. Jake immediately looked away after that. Nobody had called him decent in years. Not and meant it. Outside, one of the guards approached quickly. Ma'am, Eleanor turned. We found something else. What the guard hesitated, then looked toward Jake briefly. A man 2 blocks over photographed the garage this morning. Jake stood up immediately. What man he left before we reached him? The guard handed Eleanor a phone. A blurry security image filled the screen. Jake stepped closer. The man wore a baseball cap and dark jacket. Average height, nothing memorable. But Jake's blood went cold anyway, because he recognized him. Not the face, the jacket logo, Brenner Automotive Consulting, the same company from Daniel's crash investigation. Jake grabbed the phone harder. That's them. Eleanor looked sharply at him. You're certain I've seen those jackets before? The suited man cursed under his breath. The room shifted instantly again. Not random surveillance anymore. Connected surveillance. Connected directly to Daniel's death. Jake handed the phone back slowly. Then another realization hit him. A bad one. He looked toward Eleanor. When you came here 3 nights ago, yes, was your car already being tracked? Eleanor went very still. Jake answered his own question before she could. Yes. Nobody spoke. Because now the implication was horrifyingly obvious. They had not found Jake accidentally afterward. They already knew where Eleanor stopped that night, meaning someone likely watched the entire interaction from the beginning. Jake suddenly remembered the strange feeling he had during the storm. That sense that somebody outside was there, watching. He had ignored it. Now he wished he hadn't. The suited man's phone buzzed again. He answered immediately. Then his face changed. Fast. Ma'am, he said sharply. What now, Marcus says local police just received an anonymous tip. Jake's stomach dropped. What kind of tip? The man looked directly at Jake. They reported illegal firearms and stolen auto parts at this garage. Jake exploded instantly. What Eleanor swore softly under her breath for the first time. The suited man continued. 2 patrol cars are already en route. Jake stared at him in disbelief. I don't have anything illegal here. They don't care, Eleanor said quietly. Jake looked at her and finally understood. This wasn't just about killing people. It was about controlling stories, ruining credibility, destroying witnesses before they could speak. Jake suddenly saw the entire trap clearly. If police found evidence inside his garage, everything he said afterward would sound like lies from a desperate criminal. Daniel's case, the brake sabotage, all of it buried instantly. Jake felt panic rising now. Real panic. What do we do outside? Distant sirens echoed faintly through the neighborhood, getting closer. Eleanor looked at him carefully, then asked the question that changed everything. Jake, her voice lowered. Do you trust me enough to leave with me right now? Jake looked at the garage around him. The cracked concrete floor, the rusted tool chest near the wall, the coffee machine that barely worked. The old photo of him and Marisol hanging crooked beside the office window. His entire life fit inside this place. and now he might have to walk away from it in less than a minute. Outside, the sirens were louder, closer, not rushing, steady, confident, like people already convinced they would find what they came for. Jake's chest tightened hard. "This is insane," he muttered. Eleanor stepped closer. "Yes, you expect me to just leave with you? I expect you to survive." Jake laughed sharply. "That's not the same thing." The suited man checked his watch. "We're out of time." Jake ignored him. His eyes stayed on the garage. Every late night, every repaired engine, every memory of Marisol sitting beside him on overturned buckets drinking terrible coffee while rain hit the roof. Gone. Or about to be. He suddenly felt angry again. Not scared. Angry. Because this place was all he had left of her. And now strangers in suits and corrupt people he had never met were about to take it too. "No!" he said suddenly. Everyone looked at him. Jake pointed toward the office. "I'm not running like a criminal." Eleanor's expression tightened. "Jake, no." The sirens echoed again outside. Closer now. Jake grabbed his keys from the desk. "If cops are coming, I'll talk to them." Eleanor looked genuinely alarmed for the first time. "You don't understand." "No," Jake snapped. "I understand perfectly. Somebody's trying to bury this whole thing, and now I'm in the middle of it." The suited man moved toward the door carefully. "Mr. Moreno, if evidence has already been planted, I didn't do anything that won't matter." Jake fell silent, because deep down, he knew that was true. Eleanor stepped closer again. "Listen to me carefully." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes did not. "They already killed my son." Jake swallowed hard. They already buried one investigation, another step closer, and now they are trying to bury you. The garage suddenly felt unbearably small. Jake looked toward the office again, toward the photograph. Marisol smiled back at him from another lifetime. Then suddenly he remembered something. The week before, she died. He had been arguing with a hospital billing manager in the hallway, furious and exhausted and ready to punch a wall. And Marisol whispered afterward, "Jake, don't waste the little time we get being proud." At the time he hated hearing it, because pride was all he had left. Now those words came back hard enough to hurt. Outside car doors slammed, very close. The suited man immediately moved toward the side window. "They're here." Jake's pulse jumped. Blue and red lights flashed faintly across the garage walls. Not many, just enough. Enough to make the neighborhood stare forever. Jake cursed under his breath. Eleanor watched him carefully, then quietly asked if Marisol were standing here right now. What would she tell you to do? That landed like a punch. Jake looked away immediately, because he already knew the answer. And he hated it. He grabbed the old photo frame off the desk suddenly. Eleanor blinked. Jake stared at Marisol's smiling face for one long second, then shoved the frame carefully into his duffel bag. The suited man exhaled quietly. "Good choice." Jake pointed at him immediately. "Don't look relieved. I still hate all of this." "Understood?" Outside, heavy footsteps approached the front entrance. A voice shouted, "Chicago PD." Jake's entire body tightened. Another bang hit the garage door. "Open up." The suited man looked at Eleanor. She nodded once. Instantly, everything became coordinated movement, professional, fast. One guard moved toward the rear exit. Another killed the office lights. Jake stood frozen for half a second watching strangers take control inside his garage. His garage. The realization hurt more than expected. Eleanor touched his arm gently. "Jake." He looked at her and suddenly saw it. Not power, not money, fear, real fear, not for herself, for him. That changed something. Jake grabbed his bag. Back exit. The suited man nodded immediately. vehicle waiting in the alley. Another slam shook the garage door. Mr. Moreno, open the door now. Jake's heart pounded violently. This was happening. Actually happening. He followed the guards quickly through the narrow hallway behind the office. The old living space smelled like dust, detergent, and motor oil. Embarrassing little details suddenly jumped out at him. Unwashed dishes, a broken lamp, Marisol's old sweater still hanging beside the bathroom door because he could never bring himself to move it. Eleanor noticed it, but said nothing. That silence felt strangely kind. Another loud bang echoed from the garage front. Jake flinched. "Hurry," one guard whispered. They reached the rear metal door leading into the alley. Cold air rushed inside as it opened. A black SUV waited with engine running. Jake hesitated one final time, then looked back. Through the dim hallway, he could still see part of the garage. His garage. The place where he buried himself after Marisol died. The place where he stopped living and started merely surviving. And now he was leaving it behind without knowing if he would ever return. The pain of that surprised him. Eleanor stepped beside him quietly. "You can still stay." Jake gave her a tired look. "And get arrested for things I didn't do." "No," she whispered. "I meant emotionally." Jake stared at her. For one strange second, the noise outside disappeared. No sirens, no shouting. Just two exhausted people standing in a freezing Chicago alley carrying ghosts nobody else could see. Jake looked away first. "Yeah," he muttered softly. "Still working on that." Then suddenly a crash exploded from inside the garage. Metal hitting concrete. Voices shouting. The police had entered. The guards moved instantly. "Move!" Jake climbed into the SUV beside Eleanor just as another shout echoed from the building. Gun Jake jerked toward the sound. "What?" The doors slammed shut before anyone answered. The SUV accelerated hard down the alley. Jake twisted around in his seat, staring through the rear window as Moreno Auto disappeared behind flashing police lights. And then he saw it. An officer emerging from the garage holding a handgun wrapped in evidence plastic. Jake felt sick instantly. "I don't own a gun." Nobody inside the SUV spoke. They didn't need to. Jake looked down at his grease-stained hands. Hands that spent 30 years fixing broken machines. Now suddenly connected to planted evidence and police raids and corporate murder. His old life was gone. Just like that. The SUV turned sharply onto another street. Jake leaned back heavily against the seat. His breathing felt uneven. Eleanor watched him quietly. "I'm sorry." Jake laughed once. Not because anything was funny, because he was too exhausted to do anything else. You know the worst part? What Jake stared out the window at Chicago rushing past. "If this happened a month ago," he swallowed hard, "I probably would have let them arrest me." Eleanor stayed silent. Jake rubbed tired hands over his face. "But then I'd never know what happened to your son." The SUV interior became quiet again. Outside, the gray clouds rolled low over the city skyline. Rain started falling once more. Soft this time. Jake closed his eyes briefly. And somewhere deep inside him, for the first time in years, something had awakened. Not hope. Not yet. Something smaller. Purpose. The safe house sat near the edge of Lake Michigan. Not a mansion. Not some ridiculous billionaire bunker. Just a quiet modern home hidden behind trees and steel gates, tucked into a wealthy neighborhood where people minded their business because everyone had secrets worth protecting. Jake stood near the window holding a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Rain rolled down the glass outside. Chicago looked gray from here too, just cleaner. One of Eleanor's security people had given him fresh clothes an hour earlier. Jeans, black sweater, new boots. Jake hated all of it. The clothes fit too well. Nothing about the situation should have fit. Behind him, Eleanor sat at the dining table surrounded by papers, old file, and photographs spread beneath warm yellow lights. She looked smaller now somehow, not weaker, just tired. The kind of tired people carried after fighting for too long. Jake finally turned toward her. So what happens now? Eleanor removed her glasses slowly. We proved Daniel was murdered. Jake snorted softly. Simple. No, she admitted. Not simple. Outside the room, guards moved quietly through the house. Phones buzzed constantly. Computers glowed. Everybody seemed tense, like they were waiting for something bad to happen. Jake understood the feeling. He had lived inside that feeling since Marisol got sick, always waiting for the next call, the next bill, the next piece of bad news. Eleanor slid a folder toward him. Jake approached carefully and opened it. Inside were photographs of damaged vehicles, maintenance reports, insurance forms, names, dates. Too many dates. You kept all this for 10 years. Jake looked up. You never stopped. No. Her answer came instantly, without drama, without hesitation. Jake studied her for a long moment. Most people thought grief became smaller with time. Jake knew better. It just became quieter. He flipped through more pages, then stopped suddenly. One photograph showed Daniel standing beside a black sedan outside Moreno Auto years earlier. Jake stared at it. Daniel smiled at the camera, holding a greasy wrench in one hand. Jake barely remembered the picture being taken. Marisol took this, he murmured. Eleanor nodded softly. She mailed me a copy after Daniel died. Jake swallowed hard. Why? She wrote. Eleanor paused carefully. She wrote that Daniel looked genuinely happy that day. Jake sat down slowly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally, Jake looked back at the photo. Daniel had grease on his face, smiling like a normal guy instead of some billionaire heir. Jake suddenly remembered the conversation from that afternoon years ago. Daniel sitting on the hood of the car while Marisol laughed at both of them arguing about classic engines. And then Daniel saying quietly, "You ever feel like people already decided who you're supposed to be?" At the time, Jake barely listened. Now the memory hit differently. Eleanor folded her hands together. My son trusted very few people. Jake looked at her. He trusted you. Jake shook his head slowly. He barely knew me. That's not always important. Silence again. Then one of the guards entered quickly. Ma'am, everyone looked up immediately. The guard held a tablet. News stations are reporting the police raid. Jake's stomach tightened. The guard placed the tablet on the table. A local news broadcast filled the screen. Images of Moreno Auto flashed across it, police tape, evidence boxes, neighbors watching. Then came Jake's photo, old driver's license image from years ago. The headline beneath it read, Local mechanic investigated for illegal firearms and stolen property. Jake stared at the screen in disbelief. That fast Eleanor looked furious now. Not emotional, cold furious. They were prepared. The reporter continued speaking. Anonymous sources claim Moreno may have connections to organized vehicle theft operations. Jake barked out a stunned laugh. Organized theft? He looked at Eleanor. I can barely organize my toolbox. Nobody laughed. Because the speed of it was terrifying. The story was already built, already spreading. Jake suddenly understood how easy it was to erase someone, not by killing them, by rewriting them. The guard muted the television. Eleanor looked at Jake carefully. You can still leave. Jake blinked. What if you walk away now? I'll make sure you're protected financially. Jake stared at her. You think this is about money? She said quietly. I think this is about cost. That landed harder than expected. Because she was right. This already cost him his garage. Maybe his name too. And if things got worse, possibly his freedom. Jake stood and walked toward the window again. The lake outside looked endless under the rain. He thought about Moreno Auto, about the first day he opened it with Marisol 30 years earlier. Back then, they were broke too, but hopeful. God, they were hopeful. Marisol painted the sign herself because they couldn't afford professionals. The letters came out crooked. Jake used to tease her about it. She would threaten him with paintbrushes. He smiled faintly at the memory. Then the smile disappeared, because the shop was probably gone now, either seized, destroyed, or buried under suspicion forever. Eleanor's voice came softly behind him. You loved her very much. Jake nodded once. Yeah, she sounds brave. Jake looked down at the untouched coffee in his hand. No, he whispered. She was scared all the time. Eleanor stayed quiet. Jake finally turned back toward her, but she kept being kind anyway. The room became still after that. Even the guards seemed quieter somehow. Jake set the coffee down carefully, then walked back toward the table, toward the files, toward Daniel's photograph, toward the ugly truth waiting underneath 10 years of lies. He sat down heavily. Eleanor watched him. Jake exhaled slowly. Okay, a small pause. Then tell me everything. For the first time since arriving at the safe house, Eleanor looked like she might cry. Not dramatically, just exhaustion finally cracking open slightly. She looked down at Daniel's picture and touched it gently with trembling fingers. When Daniel died, she said quietly, he left me a voicemail. Jake frowned. A voicemail I couldn't listen to it for years. Her voice weakened slightly now. 3 nights before the crash, he called me after midnight. Jake leaned forward, and Eleanor swallowed carefully. He said, her eyes filled slowly. He said if anything happened to him, I should never trust the board. Jake felt cold move through him again. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the lake. Eleanor reached into the folder and removed a small flash drive. Black, plain, tiny enough to miss. Daniel hid company files before he died. Jake stared at it. And you have them now? No. She looked directly at him. I know where they are. Jake frowned. Then why haven't you gotten them? Eleanor's eyes darkened. Because the last person who tried disappeared. The room went silent again. Jake stared at the flash drive, at Daniel's photograph, at the exhausted woman sitting across from him, carrying 10 years of grief and suspicion, almost entirely alone. Then he thought about Marisol again, about kindness, about fear, about people choosing decency even when it costs them everything. Jake leaned back slowly, tired, scared, angry, but awake now in a way he had not felt for years. Outside, rain continued falling over Chicago. And somewhere in the city, people powerful enough to destroy lives probably believed the problem had already been handled. A broke mechanic framed as a criminal. An old woman dismissed as paranoid. Another story buried. Another truth erased. Jake looked down at his rough, grease-stained hands resting on the table, then quietly asked, so where did your son hide the files? Eleanor met his eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, neither of them looked alone anymore.